Welcome to podcast number 9 of the Drop Everything podcast. I'm your host, Dan Holzman, and today I'll be talking with Kevin Axtell. We'll discuss the spinning community, firewalking, the IJ, and much, much more. So stick around for that, but before we get there, let's thank our sponsor. We only have one sponsor today, but that sponsor is very important. It's the International Jugglers Association. You can find them at juggle.org. Join the membership, become a life member, really join the society and the community that is the IJA. Okay, let's get into our conversation with the great, the talented, the great and talented Kevin Axtell. First off, am I saying that correctly? Is it Axtell?
Close. Axtell.
Axtell. Kevin Axtell. Now, a good thing about this podcast, or one of the good things, is that I feel like I know you. I feel like I know you since I've seen you at lots of different conventions. Probably for 20 years, are we saying?
Close to, not quite, probably 15.
15. But I don't feel like I know Kevin Axtell, you know? I know you're up from somewhere. So clue me into from the background, because I want to say Sonoma?
Close. Yeah, I live very near Sonora, California, which is in central northern California in the foothills, close to Yosemite and Lake Tahoe up in the mountains.
Ooh, okay. I picture a very nice, mountainous nature type of atmosphere. Am I picturing that correctly?
That's exactly correct.
Okay.
I'm looking out my window at just that.
Nice, nice. And is that where you grew up as well?
Not exactly. I was born in Colorado Springs and then moved to California really early. And then I've lived in several different cities, such as Santa Barbara as a child, and then the Bay Area, Foster City, San Francisco area, Sacramento. And it wasn't until my high school years that I moved up to the mountains.
And before juggling came into your life, what kind of activities did you do? Were you a pretty normal child upbringing?
Yeah, I'd say fairly normal. I played baseball and fought with my brother and played video games and pretty standard Americana upbringing.
And so when did the all-encompassing spectrum of juggling approach, and how did you become aware of juggling?
In high school, my senior year, in both my newspaper class and my drama class, Aaron Stevens, a juggler who you know and many others do, was already juggling, and we went to the same high school. And becoming friends with Aaron, I took an interest in juggling, more so than my schoolwork certainly, and learned juggling during class time from Aaron Stevens. And soon after, maybe 6 months after, went to the Lodi Juggling Festival, my first juggling festival. And that's really when I stepped into the world of juggling.
Now, so you were about 16, 17 years
17,
old?
17.
I wonder if I know you from those Lodi days. I certainly did a lot of Lodi. I came up here 18 years ago myself from Los Angeles.
I remember, I was just a starter then, but I do remember you from those festivals you performed. From 1999 until Lodi ended, I went.
Yeah, it's too bad that one ended. It's nice to have a local festival, or at least several local festivals, and that was certainly a very good one. So when you saw Aaron juggling, what about the juggling struck it as something that was something you wanted to do?
Well, I can't really remember exactly. I was definitely avoiding other types of schoolwork. I definitely liked Erin, and she was a cool person to hang around. And I liked the feeling of accomplishment, getting something. And I also early on really liked juggling to music. And I liked to dance, but I didn't feel I was good at dancing. But when I was juggling to music, it was like dancing.
Now, did you have any dance training? Are you a self-taught movement artist?
Not at the time, but through college, I did take several different dance classes: choreography, modern dance, jazz. So I do have some dance training from college.
No, so you learned to juggle, and how quick would you say it became? So you went to Lodi. Would you say after that your identity shifted a little bit? Did you consider yourself a juggler at that point?
Yeah, pretty quickly. I took the identity of juggling. I remember learning to contact juggle and getting obsessed with it really early on in my juggling. And the response that I got from people made me feel good. So I'd say within a year of learning to juggle, I identified as a juggler and never looked back.
And was there always a performance element? Did you always see yourself as someone who was going to become a performer?
No, originally it was a hobby and an interest. And then I went to a lot of concerts, bands, and things. And in the crowd, I would enjoy dance, juggling, improv.
Hmm.
And as I got better, more people started to watch me, which led to performing occasionally with a few bands. And so the performance side of things evolved from a hobby.
So someone would see you that would then invite you up on stage to perform, or how
Oh,
would something like that work?
well, specifically, there was a band called Alma Melodiosa, and they're still around actually. And they lived in the area, and I became friends with them after going to many of their shows. And they liked the juggling and made space for me to juggle in a semi-informal performance context.
Hmm.
And that really, really hooked me. I loved it.
And what size crowds are we talking about? Pretty fairly large?
Well, occasionally, most of the time, you're probably looking at 50 to 100 people, but they
Hmm.
did go on tour. I went on tour with them a few times, and at bigger festivals, you were looking at anywhere from 200 to 1,000 people crowds.
So that must have been a pretty exciting early experience to kind of hammer in this idea of if I do this, people will watch,
Definitely.
and you got a lot of positive reinforcement. So you always sort of started with this movement style in mind from the beginning?
I'd say, yeah, the musical influence was really big right from the start with my juggling, and dance was a big part of my passion and interest in juggling.
Now, were there some of these jam bands? Did you do like the Grateful Dead or Fish or anything like that?
Well, I was less than following any particular band. I really enjoyed festivals, music
Hmm.
festivals, world music festivals, electronic music festivals. I wasn't so much interested in particularly the type of music. So I remember, I think it was at Mountain Air, jamming out to the Dead, what's left of them, and all sorts of different events. I never followed a particular band
Hmm.
like the Dead, for example, but I did enthusiastically go to any music festival I could uh, through my mid 20s.
Because I was just listening to a podcast, Busker Hall of Fame, Carl Soliter, and he was saying that he actually, one of his early gigs was doing street shows in the parking lot of Grateful Dead shows.
Nice.
So did you ever find any money-making opportunities, or were these all just sort of show up, we'll let you juggle kind of
Um,
situations?
Eventually, I would get a portion of like the hat from the
Mhm.
night. Kind of split it with the band. My first real experience making money was street performing in a small little town called Columbia. I'd say
Okay.
all of those festivals were very low financially speaking, but it wasn't until street performing that I started to take a take an interest in the money making element of it all. That was all passion and youthful
No,
zeal.
I could see you out there. I could picture you out there. If people are familiar with your juggling, it's not too hard to picture a young Kevin Axtell out in the middle of a sea of fellow music worshipers, and he brings out his contact juggling, and the crowd parts to watch him work his magic. I can view that pretty easily. So
That's about right.
yeah, cool. So then so you're sort of feeling you're a juggler, and when I wonder when that actual transition begins, as far as how would you characterize somebody? When do you know you're a juggler, not just someone who can juggle? You think there's a moment that that the addiction can be identified?
For some people, I do. I think you might have a particular moment, whether that's from some type of, insobriety or some psychological state, or for others, a show or that moment when you have a hat full of money. For me,
Right, right.
I think it was several different moments. I did not really have a community of my own, so to speak,
Hmm.
until going to the juggling festivals, and that was a big part of it. I think that was when I was like, okay, wow, this is a group of people. They're a lot like me. I get along great with them. I have something to add to it all. So for me, the juggling festivals really was when I hooked. But I think some people have an aha moment, and others slowly slip into it.
I think it might be that moment you send away for more props, maybe. Like, I need some clubs, or just something like that where you're going to take it a
Yeah,
little beyond, or, I need to learn a few more different tricks when I'm in a situation where I'm called upon to juggle, as if we're ever called upon to juggle, I'll have a little routine I'll be able to. Because I think
my,
anybody who maybe has a little routine and can sort of perform if called upon, maybe can be considered a juggler.
we used to joke that it was the 5 ball mark once you've
Okay.
put that time in. But there's so many different props now; it's hard to gauge that one thing. But that was kind of the. I think there's something to that. Like you
Right.
really picked up something 1,000 times and tried it again.
Right. You cross a certain threshold of a skill
Yeah,
where up till five, I can see someone sort of dilly-dallying and getting to four and be able to do four semi, but to actually get five around a few times, okay, that's a big commitment of time.
yeah, it's a good indicator, but it's not the only one. There's 3 ballers for life that are obviously.
Hmm. So no, so now you're getting out of high school, you're starting to do some of these local festivals, you're kind of getting some performance experience, making a few bucks. So how do you sort of start your career out of high school? Do you go on to higher education? Do you get a real job? What happens next?
Well, I basically got no higher education. I got a AA, liberal studies from a community college. That took me about 4 years too. I really enjoyed
Okay.
slowly going through my college, and during those years, I had street performing, which led to smaller gigs. Um,
And
I
how did you
learned
know how to street perform? Was Aaron somebody who was able to give you the basics in that world as well? Because it's a big step from juggling to actually putting a show together.
definitely, along with juggling festivals, the internet. I was one of the early internet jugglers.
Hmm.
I remember searching desperately for videos before it was really a thing. And there was performers.net all the way back then, and a ton of articles on street performing. I learned so much
Mm.
from performers.net articles.
Yeah, we'll put
And
up a
then
link to that. That's good
then
resource.
the IJDB at the time, if you recall, had articles from Stephen Regatz had some of the best ones on performing and creating acts. And so I really searched out the internet early on. And then, of course, juggling festivals. You see performance, you talk with people, you learn things. So those were the main areas that helped me start to break into that. Another one was fire, which has been a big part of my journey. I got torches. I was hooked at juggling festivals and quickly was into, oh, cool, fire poi, fire staff. And people hired me for parties for fire shows.
Now, when you say you worked in Columbia, I've heard of Columbia. That's like an old West town. Is that the theme
That's
of it?
right. It's the only place in our area where they don't have car traffic. They shut all the car traffic down for the old timey authentic feel.
Hmm.
And through definitely the summer and parts of the rest of the year, there's street performing. You just have to cater to the old timey.
Right.
You can't go out there with,
Sure. Do they let you use amplification? Are you allowed to use music?
no, no. But I mean, that was earning my chops.
Right.
Street performing is you could have a terrible show and then a great one, and it's up and down, and this worked and that didn't. And I started with ambient, right, not trying to draw a crowd, and
Right.
made a little bit of money, and I was excited about that. Just juggling for the small groups of people that stopped to watch.
Right. So basically, you would put a hat out, start to juggle, and just as people walked by, if they wanted to put some money in, they saw what you were doing.
Yeah, and that was it at first, and it was kind of low pressure on
Hmm.
me.
Right.
But I quickly learned from those articles, it's all about a show and a hat.
Yes. As
It's
far as the amount of money you can make, the
oh yeah,
ambient versus what they would call the circle show, it's not really much of a comparison. If you're doing what you're doing and want to make money, eventually putting a show together, gathering the crowd, doing the show, passing the hat.
definitely, and it instantly worked. I would do 3 shows a day instead of juggling all day, and I'd make 5 times as much money just because you do the show, you get the finale, you do the hat pitch right before the finale.
Hmm.
Yeah, that was awesome. And performance wise, I think the next step was starting to juggle at juggling festivals.
So
starting to
when
do the
was your
show.
first IJA? So you went to the Lodi.
I went to Lodi, and then maybe a few years later, I started going also to the Humboldt Juggling Festival,
Mhm.
a major part of my juggling culture. And I started to do shows at the Renegade. It's a
Right.
perfect place. You start to perform actually on a stage, the Renegade shows, and then started to do the public shows at the Berkeley Juggling Festival and the Humboldt Juggling Festival. And when I started to put together a real act, is about when I went to the IJA, which is a fun story. My first IJA, Aaron Stevens and I went on a road trip to the Rainbow Gathering in Utah, and on our way back, went to our first IJA 2003 Reno, which
Oh,
was
2003. Wow, that was your first?
that was my first.
I hate to date myself, but my first was 1980 Fargo.
Yeah, and we watched you. A friend of mine, Eric Cumberland, gave me a bunch of IJA VHSs back in the day, and I remember watching you guys long before I ever went.
Yeah, our first one was a road trip. I went with some other characters in a van with Mike Boyer, who was used to be Barry Friedman's old partner, and John Luker. And we all drove a van. And they quickly discovered I couldn't drive, which they they didn't know at the time. I was already like 18, 19 years old, and they figured that I would do my share of the driving. And they quickly discovered I did not have a license and had never learned to drive. So, but I said, well, my thing will be to keep everybody up and entertained and talking to them while they drive. So you can imagine the joy of me talking to you the whole drive. So,
Oh,
but that was my first drive across experience. So 2003 Reno.
that was that blew my whole
Yeah.
juggling world wide open. Ant Gatto, Victor Key.
Mm,
Um, I mean, the names go on and on
right,
of the
right.
people. That was the year that they banded together to save the IJA or whatever. But it exploded our Aaron and
If
I's
that was the
world.
year, was that the year Mark McGuire put the show together and
Uh,
just
I,
loaded it with big name talent? Was
it
that?
was absolutely loaded. The yeah, the cascade of
Yeah.
stars. And it was funny actually. I remember I auditioned for I went through the championships audition
Hmm.
with this incredibly poor routine where I tried multi-ball contact toss juggling, and so acrylics are all over the stage, and I just was way out of my element. I'm so glad I did it. I mean, looking back, I had no chance, and it was comical that I tried to get in back then. But I was brave enough to try, and that failure taught me everything. And when I came back and tried to compete later, I knew that I had to be at a different level.
Well, what I like is you're setting a very attainable direction for people to follow. As far as you're not setting it sounding very difficult to attain as far as direction of picking up juggling from a friend, starting to juggle at some festivals, getting some experience at the IGA or other festivals, performing up on stage. These are certainly a good sort of path other people can follow, especially to the fact that you didn't really even start until you were in high school, where when I started out, one of the things that people thought was the best jugglers or that your chance for the most success was to start when you're a kid.
Right.
If you didn't start when you're 8 or 9 years old, you're already behind the curve. Of course, we had guys like Dick Franco, who I don't think started until his 20s and went on to a very successful career.
Yeah, I think with information being what it is, there's something to a level of high technical mastery. There's
Mhm.
something to starting young.
Oh,
Like
definitely.
Tai Tojo's on the path, to be there. But as far as professional performance and earning a living from juggling, I don't think you need to have started young.
I think when you start young, it has something to do with consistency. Whenever I
Yeah.
think of the guys who started young, like Rudy Horn or Bob Bromson, certainly, of course, Anthony Gatto or Chris Cremo, I just think of these guys who just, by a certain age, had pounded out already so many shows. So by the time they're 13, 14 years old, they're already hardcore seasoned professionals.
Right.
And it's hard to sort of overcome that. But like you're saying, to be a performer nowadays, to be able to do something with juggling that suits your temperament and personality is a lot more available. Before it used to be pretty much you would do a review show or you would go into, Harlem Globetrotters, or you basically end up doing an 8-minute act to music was sort of the direction I thought coming up.
Mm.
But now here you are, you're coming up, you have all this exposure to the internet, So you go to your first IJA convention. What were some of the things or jugglers that you saw that really resonated with you, that sort of stood out as, oh my God, moments from this first convention experience at the IJA?
Yeah, well, Michael Menez was there, and I had already fallen in love with his work from the IJA VHSs that we got to watch before
Hmm.
we ever went. And meeting him, juggling with him, watching him in person was stunning. Victor Key was those two from my early juggling. They were it. The high end dance technical, and then the shapes that Menez would work with, and the artistry. So those were really the two big ones. You know, I was excited to watch Anthony Gatto,
Hmm.
but for me, it was Michael Menez and Victor Key. They were really what I was after at the time.
Now, when you're coming up as a juggler, where does the, I guess you would call it, the flow community fit in? Did you also have a foot in this other world of the poi, and were there other conventions that maybe your mainstream jugglers weren't going to?
At the time, not quite yet. If we're looking at the
Hmm.
2003 to
Right,
2005 range, for me, I had
right.
started spinning fire poi because they were at juggling conventions during the fire circles, but the spinning knowledge, the technical realm was very basic and simple at the time. And, you know, I would toss juggle torches, not spin them. It wasn't until many years later when I really went to my first fire festival, Fire Drums. And that was sort of another mind blowing experience that there's this culture of spinning flow
Hmm.
arts that is different and yet so much the same, and they kind of have been evolving. The juggling scene has a greater history or longer history,
Right.
and the flow art scene is coming up in that. And I was one of the few people at the time, early on, who was really definitely in the juggling scene and definitely in the fire scene. And more, there's a lot of people whose Venn diagram go into both bubbles.
Yeah, I try to have my foot in both. I've always been very appreciative of it, and I've never been one of those people who looked at poi as something like lesser than juggling. I think when it first came out, there was sort of this feeling like, oh, look how much attention that person is getting doing something so easy.
Yeah.
When here I am doing something much more difficult, and yet people are not as aesthetically pleased with what.
Yeah, at juggling festivals, there's been historically a taboo on poi, and I think it's partly what you just described, and partly that when people try it, they learn one or two moves and go, "Oh, this is easy." Poi can be pushed technically
Oh
as
my
far
God.
as any other prop, and it's insane what one can do. And we're only now starting to break that taboo. That, you know, poi is for
Right.
little girls, which is I don't believe at all. I spin poi almost religiously. It's my exercise, my stretching.
Well, maybe one of the taboos could come from how annoying something is in the gym. Like if it's like shaker cups, it's annoying because it's noisy. I think
Yeah.
poi was also kind of annoying because you might get hit in the head. People are swinging it around. They're taking up a lot of space.
Yeah,
Where it's like,
yeah,
hey man. So maybe it was just a little bit more annoying than juggling. But also, like you say, you could pick it up immediately. You could do a couple, maybe the weave or something. You're
which
like, I'm
makes it a
doing poi.
fantastic prop. It makes it
Yeah,
accessible. It's a gateway to prop manipulation.
I like poi. And like you were saying, I think nowadays with some of this release moves, like with the poi that has the smaller ball in place of the handle, so it's not attached to your fingers.
Yeah, and that's become really the standard these days. Poi has grown into contact poi, which combines contact juggling and poi. And then the 3 and 4 poi worlds, if anyone is not watching all of this, both with toss and manipulation, multi poi is insane and exploding right now. Very exciting times in poi.
Well, I was looking, the other day. I was watching some hoop dance videos. Is something I'll do. Just cruise the internet for hoop dance videos. It's just amazing. Sometimes you see like, wow, this, and I didn't realize it was so young. But you're saying like even like 2003, that era, it still wasn't like something in the mainstream where you were going to conventions or. Now this fire drums I've heard of. Is that the largest of the flow community get-togethers?
Essentially, I mean, Obviously, I would say if you're looking at sheer number of spinners, Burning Man is the biggest gathering of flow artists, but that's not the only reason they go. They go for all sorts of
Right.
different other reasons, and it was a major hub and reason for the explosion in the recent culture. Fire Drums is definitely the premier fire flow festival and has been going now for 13 years, I think. And it started with a bunch of people on the beach and grew into a well organized fire festival. I think at its peak it had 800 people, participants, not including staff, and that is the biggest a flow festival has gotten in the U.S. But Kinetic Fire is well on its heels with that's over in Ohio, Ohio, pardon me, and
Okay.
they had 600 last year. So
And have you been to the Burning Man scene yourself?
I know the Burning Man scene well. I don't personally go to Burning Man. There's a bluegrass festival that my friends and I kind of hook up every
Right.
year, like family. But I've been to what are called decomps and pre-parties and things like that, and a lot of my friends go, and so I get a sense of the culture. But I've never been myself, and sometimes I get some flack for that. But
I think a bluegrass festival sounds nicer to me.
yeah,
I
I
picture
don't
the
want.
Burning Man. I picture myself huddled in a Winnebago during the day, just going like, "Oh my God, it's so hot." Then at
Yeah,
night, I'm getting so dirty.
yeah.
I don't know if
I'm,
I'm a Burning Man type of, but I
I'm
would like to experience one of these flow festivals. Are they set up the way that I would say like an IGA convention is set up, like multi-day?
yeah, multi-day. I'm directing the show at Fire Drums this year, Dan. You could come and host. You could be our MC.
When is it?
We're to finalize the dates now, but traditionally it's at the end of May.
That sounds good to me. I've got a booking. Look at that.
Hey, gotta get.
Well, all right.
uh,
Call my manager and agent, or we can just talk after the festival. But that sounds very interesting. I certainly would like to do something like that. That might be a perfect opportunity for me to come. Because nowadays I feel as if when I go to a convention, I want to have some involvement.
mm, yeah, me too.
I want to direct a show or MC, or I very rarely go now to a festival unless it's even a local ones that I'm not actively involved with.
To answer your question, they are similar and different. Most fire flow festivals are centered around camping, definitely. There's usually
Okay.
no hotels or convention center. There's workshops all day. That's always a big theme. Many of them have shows, which is kind of really they learned from the juggling festivals, I'd say. I think the shows started off not, being there, and then they started having flow cases and fire shows, and so that's now pretty much a staple. Is some kind of
Would they be happening in theaters, or do I picture that by the big fire
It's
pit?
from anywhere from a circus tent to the fire pit. A lot of these things happen at camping sites that have amphitheaters or
Nice.
arenas,
Right, right.
things like that.
And
And
would
then,
these shows take place outdoors, sort of open
yes,
sky? Oh, that sounds nice.
yes, the majority, not all of
Right,
them.
right.
And then there's I'd say for at least me and a lot of other people, the highlight of these events is the evening fire circles, which is I want to say unregulated, but it's regulated by safeties and fuel depots and different things. But anyone can go up,
Hmm.
anyone can get in there. And one of the original ideas behind fire drums was that in the fire circle, everyone is an equal. You could be spinning next to Yuta from Japan, a poi hero, and you're on the same ground and level, and you can try to make a big deal of it and perform for a small group, or you can just kind of chill out on the side or try something new. It's a very organic performance situation where people sit around campfires over a big circle and watch
Mm.
fire spinning and listen to music all night.
Right. Like then during the day you would have workshops and things like
Yeah,
that.
pretty aggressive workshop schedules. By that I mean most of these things are packed,
Mm.
packed with workshops.
Well, you're making it sound very, very attractive to me. I don't know about the camping per se. I'm not much of a camper, but I could certainly rough it. But maybe we'll. So you're saying that's May or March, did you say?
Yeah, the end of May. Often it
May.
is a little dependent on the venue,
Okay.
but I can't recommend it enough, even to people who have identify as jugglers and
Mhm.
not spinners. There's a lot of juggling, and there's a lot of value and fun to be had, and really great community.
Well, I think the identity of juggler is sort of fragmenting lately.
Yeah.
I mean, look at even like the WJF. It seems like their next festival is going to be more of a skill. I guess it's called
SkillCon.
SkillCon. SkillCon.
SkillCon.
SkillCon.
Yeah. Well, I think it's partly out of necessity for them.
That's the idea I've always pushed. I've always pushed the IGA. I think for 20 years, I was saying that you should open up the umbrella. You should embrace these other activities, flair bartending.
Right.
The one that he has involved with in his, which I don't get, is dodgeball. I
It,
that I don't see as a
I think it's a reflection of his primary demographic. I mean, if you look at the video games and the
mhm.
dodgeball
Yeah.
and the go-karts, and it's for an organization, you want to target the youth if you want to have a future. So I'm not criticizing it, but I think that those are activities that appeal to young males, basically, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, he brought sort of a violence element into it, which is
I wasn't going
beautiful.
to say that, but yes,
Well,
yes,
I mean, if
yes.
you look at it, I mean, if you look at our like the one spectrum of the community could be sort of a, if we're going to sort of stereotype it, the sort of peaceful flow. I hate to say hippie character,
No, it's a fair stereotype. It's not all inclusive, but the
right?
flow community is a lot of that, and that's what I was as a teenager, and that's what brought me into it was being a hippie. I'm not necessarily anymore, although I maintain some hippie-like parts of me. But
So,
that's a fair stereotype.
so how does one transition from being a hippie juggler type to actually sort of starting to earning some money and making it into your career? I mean, how does that transition occur?
Well, workshops at the juggling festivals, if you're interested, a lot of juggling festivals have workshops on career and performance, and there are a lot of articles, but start self-promotion, varying your act. Some people go the direction of honing one particular skill. I went the direction of learning a ton of skills. When I started to try and make money and watch other jugglers that were making money, I learned cigar boxes. I learned Diablo. I learned spinning and balancing things. I learned plates. I learned rolla bola. Those type of things I
Hmm.
think helped to create a show. Comedy. Comedy is really important. And if the type of juggling I've always wanted to do has been the artistic stage dance routine, and that's what I love so much.
Right.
But to do what I do and survive as a professional juggler, I've had to learn comedy and joke and cheesy stuff. And I created my own Apple routine with
Great.
knives and stuff. I tried to be as original as possible, but
Sure.
that balance between accepting, okay, this works and makes people respond, and there's this gap for the artist's mind. It's like what you want to achieve, but it's going to take you 10 years to be there.
Well, there's certainly something that has to fit within the template of professional juggler performer. As far as the skills you need, if someone were to say, I want a juggler to come perform for my event, in their mind, I really think they're sort of thinking more of this current comedy juggler half an hour, 45-minute audience involvement type of show. That to show up and basically do an artistic juggling show would be like, what are they doing?
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Well,
And I experienced a lot of that. My first few Ren Fair gigs,
mhm.
I tried to have artistic moments in there.
Right, right, right.
And it's just not a captive audience. Speaking of, things like Ren Fairs are good bridge.
Hmm.
Street performing. Find a place to street perform. That's where you earn your chops. That's where you quickly realize what doesn't work and what does work. And then from there, you have street fairs, craft fairs, things like that are not too hard to get into. In
Yeah.
a smaller context, you can say you'll just come for the hat. And most places, there's something to work out there. And then street fairs to Renaissance fairs, building blocks,
Well, that's
stepping
how
stones.
the Raspini Brothers started. I mean, our first sort of real gig was to drive cross country from Los Angeles to Chicago,
Oh,
or to Kenosha, Wisconsin, really, for a festival that basically was not even going to pay us.
right.
That was going to allow us to pass the hat. So we drove all the way there, and we met with the fella. His name was John Mills, and he said to us, I remember because what he said was very memorable. He said, he invited us into the office. He said, "Boys, I want to tell you something. We don't need you here. We'll let you be here. We'll give you a spot. You can be here by this log." you know, or later on he gave us a spot by the crane, but we started off with a spot by the log. And I think one of our aha moments, as far as the when I became a juggler, is so we get there, and someone had told us to pass the hat before the last trick
Yeah.
because that was a style that they had done, and so we did that for our first show, and then we passed the hat, and then we did the last trick, but I think we made money, even though we realized very quickly that wasn't the style that we wanted to do. Like we wanted to do the last trick and then pass the hat.
Right.
But just at least being there, because at that point we needed to make money purely to survive. Because we had driven out there. If we had not made any money while we were that first day at the festival, it really would have been like, oh, we're screwed. Or do we what do we do? Do we turn around and go home? Do we? So that was certainly an aha moment. But this idea of Renaissance fairs or crafts fairs or street fairs, street shows, getting your feet wet, but also this understanding that you might have a particular style that you want to explore.
Yeah.
Like for you, it was this sort of artistic juggling to music. For me, it was trying to be Chris Cremo, which wasn't going to happen. So one thing I want to talk to you about is when I watch your style, especially your style with like clubs, I see a lot of this new influence that kind of came up after me as far as my knowledge of it or awareness, and it's kind of left me behind. What is your understanding of sort of this development of this new style of club juggling? So you know what I'm talking about? It has lots of starts and stops, lots of traps.
Yep. I know
How would you
exactly what you're talking
categorize
about.
that, and how would you describe its evolution?
Cool. Well, I'll describe it through my lens and how I experienced uh, going from a toss juggler, quote unquote, to a club manipulator and a club spinner. My earliest memories are of Peapot,
Okay.
Maxim and Ville, and they were doing just crazy weird stuff. And I learned traps actually from Maxim and an IJA. I forget which one.
Yeah, I
And
invited them out to God, do I want to say North Carolina?
that sounds about right.
Yeah,
But
invited them
even
out to be the first half of the show.
yeah, that workshop changed my life. So thanks, Dan.
Okay.
But even before meeting them, watching the Peapot videos on
Uh-huh.
the internet, I remember Luke Burridge playing with some weird club stuff early on too. But so Peapot juggling, European postmodern style stuff. Jay Gilligan would be next
Hmm.
on that list for me. That the mindset of just different, and sometimes it was really weird, but he was doing different things with clubs, and I tried to mimic a few of those things. There were a few early South American and Mexico influenced club stuff. Santi Malabari and other people were spinning the clubs, even though they were working with three of them.
Hmm.
And so that had some early, and that's a much bigger influence now, and I'll get to that in a moment. In the States, along with Gilligan, I remember watching Michael Karas's early videos, and he was doing different things with clubs and adding some theatrical elements. Club swinging.
Right, because you're already a pretty proficient club swinger from the beginning.
Yeah, and those I remember the early club swinging. It was all fountains and
Hmm.
snakes and
Yeah.
weaves, and it was kind of encompassed in this bubble that it didn't really break out of until the burners got there, the fire spinners.
Well, you had Al Jacobs, who sort of set the standard.
Yeah, I remember watching and learning all those moves.
But that,
And
like I said, that was the standard for quite a long time.
quite a long time, quite a long time, and even in certain circles in juggling festivals, it's still the standard. And those moves look good and pretty. So you had the club manipulators, Peapot, Michael Karras, Jay Gilligan, and they were teaching a lot of people in Europe. They were really influencing people there. I remember watching early Eric Abaret videos. Then we have the spinning community, and they in the not just West Coast, but it's often referred to as West Coast club manipulation style. You have moves from the spinning world, holding clubs like staffs, doing things called anti-spins, using spinning terminology and understanding as more spinners, as more flow artists started to juggle clubs and bringing that element to it, it has blended in with the club manipulation stop-start style. People like Wes Peden and Patrick have pushed things, you know,
Hmm.
to a technical side. You had club manipulation, which in its own way was kind of simple at first, easy to understand, and then people like Wes and Patrick pushed club manipulation to an intense, high-end technical level. So there's influence. You know, the club manipulators and the spinning world has fused to form a hybrid blend. One of the reasons I really got into it was torches and glow juggling. Torches and glow club juggling. I always felt like eventually I was going to drop, like it was just a limited
Right.
amount of tricks I could do with torches. But when I was spinning with fire staff or poi, it was this jam, it was a dance, it was an
Hmm.
expressive act. And so learning to spin with three clubs and enabled you to blend manipulation and spinning and moves that were reliably not going to drop, but interesting to watch, with a little bit of toss juggling. So my passion for it was fueled by glow club juggling and torch
Yeah, I
juggling.
can see that because when you're doing a jam and you're in one of these situations where basically you're going to be filling a lot of time, like you're going to be performing to fire with to 20 minutes or whatever it's going to be, or you're just doing it for your own enjoyment. Is I be able to get into the flow without worrying about dropping or chasing the props.
Right, and then you do the toss moves you're confident with to pepper out the routine.
Right.
But I remember early on torch juggling in jams, and I was either going to stop or drop.
Right, right. Exactly. Or like you say, you were going to just follow this sort of basic. It's sort of
Yeah,
interesting. It's kind of like I don't know if this would be a great example, but like a Picasso or somebody, like if you look at like a Wes Peden, where they have all the skills to do this sort of straightforward technical style, but they have made more of a choice to incorporate these starts and stops and static positions. Where if you see somebody trying to do that style that doesn't have the technical base, to me, I don't care to like it very much. If it's sort of like
sure.
instead of learning the basics juggling like this guy never does it the cascade, then you realize that their juggling skill itself is pretty small.
Mm.
To me, it seems like you're saying this perfect mix of having the juggling ability like a Wes and combining it with this sensibility of not dropping, of sort of staying with the flow of these more swinging, elegant moves. To me, is producing some of the nicest new work. Like if you look at like Tony Pezzo's new routine.
Yeah, I agree. Uh, and two more things I just wanted to add on to that
Sure.
was the current Latin American scene and the club influence is spreading all over the world from Latin America, Mexico, Chile, Argentina. They are blowing up the club scene and combining technical with artistic and spinning and manipulation. And then the other one is the West Coast spinning scene. In just the past 2 years, a lot of spinners and passionate spinners, people who, do it every day, have taken two clubs. And people like Wyatt Davis and Asaf Moore, who used to be called Poi Boy, he's now really into clubs, and Marvin Ong, myself, we are spinning and club juggling
Mhm.
and manipulating all at the same time in a group. So it's only like a snowball building. I remember feeling alone and people looking at me a little weird early on when I was
Sure. Well,
doing what I
you
do.
always definitely stood out as sort of this. Here are these jugglers. Now Kevin's going to come up and do one of his pieces that we all know is going to be. There's going to be artistic interpretation in there. There's going to be movement, but it's really not going to be your straightforward guy juggling to music.
Right. So now there's a pack of a lot more people getting together, really embracing the style. More on the hobbyist side,
Hmm.
I'd say. I perform with it. Jeremiah does. I know a few. I could list a handful of people that
Right.
really professionally perform with the style. But as hobbyists go, it's really spreading fast.
Now, before you talked about performing with fire, another thing I want to talk to you about is I don't know if this is a sideline or a part of your major career, but you're also a fire walking leader.
That's right. I am a master firewalking instructor. I earned the credentials over several years.
Hmm.
It's something I love. It's something I'm passionate about. It's something that's given me the courage, basically, to step out and say, I'm going to be a professional performer, whatever the cost may be. You know, it's a scary thing. It's like
Hmm.
a leap of faith. It's just sort of like a firewalk. I'm very passionate about it. I've done it for many years, and I was mentored by Tolly Burkan, who is the firewalking founder in the West. Obviously, firewalking's existed for a long time, but he was the first one in America to say, hey, anybody can do this. You don't have to be a super shaman or anything.
Now, how did firewalking, was that something that I think Tony Robbins, was he someone who
Well,
just sort of latched onto it or?
he's the biggest name in firewalking, and Tony learned firewalking from Tolly, who
Mm,
mentored me in firewalking. But Tony had a lot of other elements. He's got the sales, he's got the
sure.
NLP, he's got the marketing machine, he's got the personality. He's larger than life,
Got the
literally.
big teeth.
Big T. Yeah, I have a lot
Big
of
smile.
admiration because he has led more people across a firewalk than anyone else on
Mhm.
the planet, and I know firsthand that it can change people's lives. And so he's definitely the figurehead of the firewalking world.
Now, is this something you sort of became aware of through these fire festivals and then you did a fire walk yourself at a certain point and got hooked on it?
Good question. My wife and I, we weren't married at the time. We're doing a fire show. This is before she went into nursing. We had a fire show that we performed around town, and we were hired to do a fire show for a firewalking instructor training graduation.
Mm.
And the reason we were hired is because I just started doing the fire contact ball. Before it was really a thing, I had made my own and I did contact with the ball on fire. And the Tully had heard about that, so he hired us, and it went really well. And then we got to Firewalk that night, and it was awesome. And we were hired two more times the next year to do it. And every time we went, the whole group was so excited, so jazzed, high on life, firewalking on these crazy
Hmm.
pits of coals. And so finally, we were like, okay, we really want to do this. And we took the instructor training, really liked it, but also got on really well with Tolly and came in and we were his assistants until he retired for the next, I think it was 4 years, which dove us head on into the firewalking world.
And are you currently leading firewalks?
Yeah, I lead several firewalks a year. I'm probably 2 or 3 times a year. I'm hired to for other companies to go
Hmm.
in and facilitate their firewalk for them
Right,
because I'm considered an expert and I know how to create the conditions to have an as safe as possible
right.
firewalk, and they'll do the talking and the message. And other times I hold my own. Recently, it's been really exciting. I've brought in the firewalking to fire drums and to flame and to kinetic fire, and other instructors that I've trained have brought in it to other flow festivals around the country. So I'm thrilled about that because it brings with it this message of you can do it, and it's a perfect match for the fire dancing world.
And if we had a firewalk at an IJ yet, is that coming?
No, I thought about it.
You
You
think
know,
the
the convention
insurance might
center
be
environment is a lot of logistics,
exactly.
and I'd have to charge. I'd have
Maybe in the hotel ballroom, they're not going to
to.
let us set up the firewalk. Now,
uh,
speaking of the IJ, though, let's talk a little bit about at a certain point, you decided not only to go to IJ conventions, but to become involved with the running of the conventions and the board.
yeah,
Give
yeah.
me a little rundown of your involvement with the IJ and maybe a little bit about what that experience in hindsight meant to you.
Sure. I forget which year it was. Kim Laird approached me, and I had befriended her at IJA's, and asked me if I would be a nominate for the board, and thought that I would be good, and they wanted young blood,
Hmm.
and without thinking much about it, I said sure, and I jumped in and wrote a basic little candidate statement, and had no idea what I was getting signing up for. Really, I just knew that I liked the IJA a lot. They had helped me. I had already jumped into professional performance, and without a doubt, the IJA helped me kickstart my career. So I wanted to get back, and I signed up. I signed. Oh, that's right. 2008 was that year, and that was the year the board was sued So the
Mm,
very first thing when I got on the board is we were sued, and I don't want to go into
right.
names or details.
And that situation seems to have,
Died down.
yes, and for a while there, it was sort of
Oh,
if
it
you
was
talked about
intense.
IJ, it was sort of like IGA and this other person became almost a couple.
It was all encompassing, and it was really intense. And
It's nice
uh,
that's over, and that's not really something that we.
yeah, and I was really basically
Yeah.
proud of how we, the board, handled it at the time. And I made a lot of friends, and boy, I learned a lot about what goes on in the background. And
Mhm.
I had a lot of idealistic thoughts and visions that, I didn't have the ability to manifest because it's so volunteer based. But I had a good time. I feel like I helped, and the challenges the board faces are crazy. And people often criticize the board of directors, but in all my experience of both knowing people when they were on it and being on it 2 terms myself, everyone means well and they're just trying. It always saddens me when people start to really criticize the board of directors.
Well, people got away from the juggling into the politics of running an organization and maybe the direction also of the organization. Like you're a fellow who I think has a pretty high profile through the IJA. So certainly to sort of see your background and kind of get this idea of how attainable this is, this kind of life to be a juggler, if you have a passion for it, if you have a unique vision and drive for it, and then you find a place for yourself, like your place in this flow community, in the firewalking community, and of course in the juggling community. And that kind of brings us up to now the present. Now you've put an act together with two other people. What's sort of your present and future plans moving forward?
Yeah, right now I'm performing with Mountain Motion. Originally, I performed with my wife, and we were Mountain Mischief, and we performed together for 3 years, and it was great. It was a lot of fun. And then she went on into nursing school to pursue another career. So I had a year and a half, almost 2 years of solo performance. And I would say that I didn't do as well because, in large part, I'm such an artist at heart, and the harder side of professional performance, the organization, the marketing,
The business
the
side, yeah.
business side, what is not my forte, though I keep growing.
Sure.
So also I felt a little lonely on the road, I'll admit it. And so I had been continually talking with two jugglers I love and admire and have known for a long time, Jeremiah Johnston and Aaron Stevens. And they moved back to the area that we originally met, and we formed Mountain Motion. It's exciting. It's fun. I believe we can create bigger pictures, better things. We do a lot of routines to music, my favorite style, kind of
Hmm.
artistic, interesting. We're all high level jugglers, so we can put together cool things. The big challenge has been, and I know you've offered to help at some point, Dan. We still got to take you up on that. The big challenge has been 3-person comedy,
Hmm.
getting an organic, natural flow to trialogue comedy. But we're getting there. We've done festivals, we've done Ren fairs, we've done schools, clubs, a whole variety of different events and gigs, and we're doing well. I'm hopeful. Got a lot of feedback that it can be very challenging to get everything you need or to make what you need when you have multiple people. 3 people requires almost triple the
Sure.
money.
Well, especially three people who aren't necessarily coupled. Like if you
Right.
have a couple who can pool the money,
Right, right. Yeah,
uh,
when Brandy and I performed together,
yeah.
we got 100% of
Hmm.
the money. And yet it's exciting, it's inspiring. Part of I'll call back to the firewalking, it seems like a challenge, and yeah, other people might say it's not possible, but there's this really gratifying thing when we move forward and succeed.
Well, it's maybe a more difficult road, but it's certainly not impossible. One thing I like that you put out recently, I don't know if you're pursuing this, I know I talked to Aaron about it, was you did something where you had a green screen behind you and you had a projection while you were club swinging and you were sort of interacting with this projection behind you.
Yeah, Shapes on Shapes was the name of that video. Jeremiah has a studio. The Johnstons have a big studio, and they have a green screen, and that's a new addition. I'm excited. That was just my first foray into that,
Well,
and
I've already gone out on a limb and saying to me that's the future of juggling is this video projection. It's
yeah,
holograms.
like that Torque Diablo video. I
Yeah,
mean,
torque
I'm
start.
all over that. I just
Well, like I say, when you see that, you realize he's doing the same moves,
right.
but all of a sudden the entertainment value is magnified by 10 or however
Oh yeah.
much. And it's the same exact move. When you go, okay, I get it. I don't have to increase my technique. I have to increase the entertainment value of what I'm presenting.
Right.
And by adding these other elements, especially embracing new technology, like I just saw that there was this Japanese hologram performed on David Letterman. I didn't see like a Japanese pop singer is a hologram, has no real identity. And
They're gonna
so,
replace us all.
no, I really believe that someday we're going to have holographic circuses or holographic jugglers
Sure.
where someone will be able to juggle 21 clubs and it will look exactly as if it would have to look physically because they just put it in a computer.
Well, that's a promising thing for fire. I think I've
Yeah.
seen big crowds watch untalented fire spinners. I mean, mildly talented,
Yeah.
and just watch it because of the heat and the energy and this raw kind of emotion.
Well, they'll be able to match that through computers as well. They'll have hit
Yeah.
the heat jets. Let the heat jets come out and cue the fire sound. Whoosh.
Right.
Lose the human element.
With Mountain Motion, yeah, we do fire shows. We have a fire show and we have a glow show, and it's taken 2 years to put it all together, but we have a Ren Fair show. And it's such a funny balance between trying to pick one thing to really excel at it and survival.
Right.
We're getting by because we have a fire show and a glow show and a school show and a Ren show.
Right.
But at the high end, you have that one particular type of show that you're really, really, really good at, and we want to get more into corporate, which pays the highest.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun. It's a really human experience to work with three good friends like that. And one of the reasons it's worked for me is because I have firewalking on the side, and I am a partner in the Flow Arts Institute, which is another area I learned from IJA, festival organization. My experience in that transferred over into the Flow Arts Institute, who runs fire drums and pack fire and kinetic fire and flame and campfire.
So you're involved in setting up other festivals than the one you were talking about before.
That's right.
So if I were to MC these different events, I'd have a whole new market for myself.
Whole new market, yeah. I don't know if it's your target demographic.
Well, maybe we'll start bringing this podcast to an end, and then you and I will continue our conversation afterwards.
Sure.
We'll discuss some possibilities because I'm also looking towards the future as far as continuing my juggling career out a few more years.
Cool. Well,
So-
I would just love to say that there is a juggling world and a juggling scene, and there is a flow arts world and a flow arts scene, and they're just starting to come together. But there's so much for everyone to learn from each other, and I really feel it's the same worlds. I think much like you, Dan. And juggling isn't just literally throwing things. The spinning world is so filled with joy and heart and passion and drive and friendship, and it's kind of this outgoing liberal sense. And the juggling world is filled with great examples of professional performance and quality shows and real technique that's been developed over years, and practice concepts that are super valuable. And they both have a lot to teach each other. So I want to encourage the jugglers to go to spinning and fire festivals, and I want to encourage the spinners and flow artists to go to juggling festivals.
And I'll be emceeing at both. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. This gave me a good insight into you, into some backstory about yourself. I look forward to the next time you and I can get together at a festival.
Yeah,
And
buddy.
thanks so much for doing podcast number 9, Kevin Axtell.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Dan.
That was podcast number 9, my conversation with Kevin Axtell. I hope you enjoyed that. Let's thank our sponsor, the IJA, International Jugglers Association. If you'd like to sponsor an upcoming podcast, please reach me at my website or just through email at danjuggle@gmail.com. Let me thank my engineer, the beautiful Karen Holzman. Once again, thanks to all the listeners and Kevin Axtell. Hope you enjoyed that. So go out there and spin some poi, juggle some clubs, walk on some fire, and drop everything when you do. Thank you so much, and see you next time.